You think this is a charity, Ethan? You think this is some kind of social club where you can just wander off, abandoning your post for every little distraction that stumbles into our sightline? This isn't a soup kitchen, son. This is a business. And that woman, whoever she was, she's certainly no part of our business now, is she? Because you, my friend, are finished. Done. Out. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which city you are listening to this story from. The words, sharp and laced with a venomous disdain that seemed to curdle the very air in the small, bustling office, pierced Ethan with a precision that went beyond mere sound. They were daggers, each one twisting deeper into the fragile architecture of his self-worth, a structure already weathered by the relentless storms of New York City life. His manager, a man whose permanent frown line seemed etched by years of scrutinizing profit margins and employee inefficiencies, stood before him, a silhouette of corporate indifference framed by the muted glow of the cafe's kitchen lights, filtering through the opaque glass. Ethan felt a peculiar sensation, as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly dissolved, leaving him suspended over a chasm of uncertainty. His breath caught, a painful knot forming in his chest, a physical manifestation of the humiliation washing over him. The sounds of the espresso machine hissing and the distant clatter of ceramic plates, usually a comforting symphony of his daily routine, now seemed to mock him, each clang a chime of his sudden, brutal dismissal. He was a waiter, a cog in the vast, churning machine of urban commerce, and in this moment he felt utterly, irrevocably broken. The woman he had helped, a mere stranger, had become an unwitting catalyst, her momentary weakness outside the cafe's ornate doors now the undeniable cause of his own undoing. He knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life, already teetering on the precarious edge of stability, had just been irrevocably altered. A tremor ran through him, not of cold, but of a profound, soul-deep despair. Ethan had always found a quiet solace in the rhythm of the downtown cafe. It was a place of constant motion, a vibrant tapestry woven from the chatter of hurried commuters, the clinking of porcelain, the aromatic embrace of freshly ground coffee beans, and the low hum of distant traffic. He moved through its narrow aisles with a practiced grace, a phantom limb of efficiency in the organized chaos, his hands adept at balancing trays laden with delicate pastries and steaming mugs. For 6 years, this had been his world, his sanctuary, his proving ground. He wasn't just a waiter. He was a silent observer, a brief, fleeting presence in countless lives, a purveyor of fleeting comforts in a city that rarely paused to breathe. The cafe, with its exposed brick walls, worn wooden floors, and the soft, diffused light filtering through tall, arched windows, felt like an extension of himself, a second skin he wore with pride. Despite the meager wages and the often thankless grind, every morning, before the first rays of sunlight fully breached the canyon-like streets of Manhattan, Ethan would arrive, the crisp, cool air of dawn biting at his cheeks. He'd unlock the heavy oak door, the chime above announcing his solitary entry, and for a few precious moments, the cafe was his alone. He'd walk the length of the empty dining room, his footsteps echoing softly, running a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the marble countertop, inhaling the rich, dormant scent of coffee and baked goods. It was in these quiet moments that he felt most at peace, a sense of belonging settling over him like a warm cloak. He meticulously arranged the sugar caddies, polished the already gleaming silverware, and wiped down the tables. Each movement, a small ritual of preparation, a testament to his dedication. His manager, Mr. Harrison, a man whose scowl was as permanent as the cafe's espresso machine, rarely acknowledged Ethan's efforts directly, but the absence of complaint was, in their unspoken language, a form of grudging approval. Ethan wasn't a man of grand ambitions, at least not in the conventional sense. His dreams were humble, rooted in a desire for stability, for a life free from the gnawing anxiety of unpaid bills and looming debt. He harbored a secret, unspoken passion for cooking, a quiet joy he found in experimenting with flavors and textures in his tiny apartment kitchen. But the reality of New York was a constant, heavy weight. Rent was an astronomical beast. Student loan repayments were relentless. And the cost of living chipped away at his modest earnings with the efficiency of a relentless sculptor. He lived in a small, cramped studio apartment in a walk-up building in Washington Heights, a world away from the polished downtown streets where he worked. The commute was long, often spent staring out the grimy subway window, watching the city blur past, a vibrant, indifferent entity. Yet, he never complained. He found strength in perseverance, in the simple act of showing up, day after day, and doing his job with a quiet dignity. His emotional state on most days was a carefully maintained equilibrium, a precarious balance between hope and resignation. He was kind, almost instinctively so, a trait that often felt at odds with the hardened edges of the city. He believed in the inherent goodness of people, even when life offered little evidence to support such a conviction. He remembered the small acts of kindness he had witnessed, the fleeting connections made over a shared cup of coffee, the silent understanding passed between strangers. These moments, however brief, were what sustained him, what kept the cynicism at bay. He was a man who felt deeply, who carried the burdens of others even as he struggled with his own. This innate empathy, this quiet compassion, was both his greatest strength and, as he was about to discover, his most profound vulnerability. The cafe was a microcosm of the city itself, a melting pot of stories and lives. There was the elderly woman who always ordered a single black coffee and read the newspaper, her eyes clouded with memories. There was the young artist who sketched furiously in a corner, fueled by endless cups of chai. And there were the tourists, wide-eyed and bewildered, swept up in the city's relentless current. Ethan soved them all, a silent witness to their fleeting moments. He learned to anticipate their orders, to read the subtle cues in their expressions, to offer a quiet smile when it was needed most. He was a silent anchor in their daily storm, and he took pride in that. His manager, Mr. Harrison, was a stark contrast to Ethan's gentle nature. Harrison was a man carved from efficiency and profit margins. His worldview narrowed to the bottom line. He saw employees as interchangeable cogs, resources to be managed, optimized, and if necessary, discarded. Compassion was a weakness, a luxury the fast-paced, cutthroat world of downtown hospitality could ill afford. He had a meticulous eye for detail, but it was a detail focused solely on flaws, on deviations from the rigid script of cafe operations. For years, Ethan had navigated Harrison's volatile moods, his sharp tongue, and his constant demands, a quiet shadow moving through the background, always present, always reliable. He had convinced himself that his quiet dedication, his unwavering commitment, shielded him from the manager's more intense scrutiny. He had been wrong. The central conflict, the precipice upon which Ethan's life now teetered, was simple, brutal, and entirely unjust. He had lost his job for an act of pure, unadulterated human kindness. The stakes were immediate and terrifying. Unemployment in a city that devoured the unprepared, mounting debt that threatened to crush him, and the chilling prospect of losing his apartment, his last bastion of independence. But the long-term stakes were far more insidious, a silent erosion of his very spirit, the loss of confidence in his own judgment, the gnawing question of whether kindness itself was a luxury he could no longer afford, and a profound sense of aimlessness, a rudderless drift in the vast, unforgiving ocean of urban existence. The humiliation of Harrison's words, the sting of being cast aside for doing what felt inherently right, threatened to leave an indelible scar on his soul, a wound that might never truly heal. He stood there, the weight of the manager's dismissal pressing down on him, and felt the first cold tendrils of despair begin to coil around his heart. The cafe, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage from which he had been violently ejected, leaving him adrift in a city that suddenly seemed colder, harsher, and infinitely more indifferent. The morning had begun like any other. The sun, a hesitant visitor, was just beginning its slow climb above the jagged skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows across the storefronts. Inside the cafe, the air hummed with the familiar symphony of early service. Ethan moved with purpose, his uniform crisp, his mind already mapping out the morning rush. He greeted Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who always sat by the window, with a gentle nod, placing her usual black coffee before she even had to ask. He exchanged a brief, knowing smile with Sarah, the barista, as she expertly steamed milk, the rhythmic hiss a comforting backdrop to their shared routine. He was in his element, a quiet conductor in this small, vibrant orchestra. The scent of fresh pastries mingled with the robust aroma of dark roast coffee, creating an olfactory tapestry that was distinctly New York morning. The gentle murmur of early customers, still half asleep but eager for their caffeine fix, filled the space. Ethan refilled water glasses, cleared empty tables, and took new orders with an almost automatic grace. His internal monologue, usually a quiet hum of tasks and observations, was momentarily lulled into a state of contented focus. He watched the city awaken through the large plate glass windows, the street gradually filling with yellow cabs, hurried pedestrians, and the distant wail of sirens, a constant low thrum beneath the everyday sounds of human life. He felt a fleeting sense of gratitude for this small, stable corner of his turbulent world. Then, a subtle shift, a shadow, not of the morning light, but of something amiss. Through the glass, he saw it. A woman, her figure suddenly crumpling on the cold concrete sidewalk, like a marionette whose strings had been abruptly cut. Her designer bag slipped from her grasp, spilling its contents in a scattered array around her. A gasp, a muted exclamation, rippled through the few patrons seated near the window. For a split second, the cafe's symphony paused, but collective breath held. Ethan's gaze locked onto her, a visceral instinct overriding the ingrained discipline of his job. He didn't think. He reacted. His internal world exploded. A rapid fire of thoughts, concerns, and duties clashed within him. "Stay at your post, Ethan. Mr. Harrison will be furious. This isn't your responsibility. Someone else will help." But what if no one does? What if she's really hurt? What if it's serious? The manager's stern face, etched with warnings about abandoning his section, flashed in his mind, a silent reprimand. Yet the image of the woman, so utterly helpless, outweighed every rule, every fear. His conscience, A deep, unwavering voice within him screamed louder than any managerial decree. He saw her pale face, her eyes fluttering, the vulnerability radiating from her prone form. It was an echo of his own anxieties, a mirror of the precariousness of life in this relentless city. Without a word, without a moment of hesitation that might have allowed reason to intervene, Ethan moved. He didn't even stop to take off his apron. He simply unlatched the heavy front door, the bell above chiming a stark, declarative note, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The sudden chill, a stark contrast to the cafe's warmth, was invigorating, sharpening his focus. He knelt beside her, his movements swift and sure. He noticed the expensive fabric of her suit, the carefully styled hair, the delicate watch on her wrist, details that suggested a life far removed from his own. Yet in this moment of vulnerability, they were all stripped away. She was just a human being in distress. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft but firm, trying to cut through the fog of her disorientation. He gently touched her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, fluttered open, unfocused and bewildered. A small gasp escaped her lips. He could see the tremor in her hands, the clammy sheen on her forehead. Dehydration, perhaps? Or something more serious? His mind raced, recalling the rudimentary first aid knowledge he'd picked up over the years. Just a little lightheaded," she mumbled, her voice faint, like a whisper against the city's roar. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs seemed to betray her. "Don't move too quickly," Ethan advised, his concern genuine. He quickly scanned the scattered contents of her bag, a sleek phone, a leather wallet, a small, elegant compact. Nothing seemed overtly damaged. He reached for a small, sealed bottle of water from his own pocket, a habit he'd picked up from long shifts on his feet. He always carried one. He opened it and offered it to her. "Here, take a sip." Slowly, she took the bottle, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his. Her gaze, though still hazy, held a flicker of surprise, perhaps even gratitude. Ethan helped her sit up against the cool, rough brick wall of the cafe, offering a steadying hand, supporting her weight. He noticed the curious glances from passers-by, the hurried steps of those who chose to avert their eyes, and the few who paused, their expressions a mix of concern and hesitant curiosity. A pang of indignation shot through him. Why was it so difficult for people to simply stop and help? He stayed with her for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, until the color slowly began to return to her cheeks and her breathing became less shallow. He discreetly gathered her belongings, placing them back into her elegant bag, ensuring nothing was lost. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "Feeling a bit better?" She nodded, her eyes now clearer, assessing him with a newfound sharpness. "Yes, thank you. I don't know what happened, just a sudden dizzy spell." She took another slow sip of water, her hand still trembling slightly. "You didn't have to do this. You're working." "It's all right," Ethan replied, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. Anyone would have done the same. It was a sentiment he truly believed, even if the evidence on the bustling street suggested otherwise. He helped her to her feet, supporting her until she felt steady. She brushed down her expensive suit, a slight flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I really appreciate it," she said, her voice stronger now, imbued with a quiet authority that belied her recent vulnerability. "You truly went above and beyond." Her eyes, a striking emerald green, held his for a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He simply nodded, a humble gesture. "Just glad you're okay, ma'am." He noticed his manager, Mr. Harrison, standing at the door, his face a thundercloud of barely contained fury. The look in Harrison's eyes was colder than the morning air, a silent, seething indictment. Ethan felt a prickle of unease, a tightening in his stomach, but he refused to regret his actions. He had done what was right. The woman, Grace, sensing the tension, or perhaps simply feeling recovered enough, offered another grateful nod, her gaze briefly flicking to Harrison before returning to Ethan, a curious intensity in her green eyes. "I really must go, but thank you again." With a final, lingering look, she turned and disappeared into the relentless current of the city, leaving Ethan standing on the sidewalk, the remnants of the incident slowly fading from the collective consciousness of the street. He watched her go, a strange sense of quiet satisfaction, mingling with the burgeoning dread of facing his manager. He knew, deep down, that his kindness had come at a cost. He re-entered the cafe, the bell chiming a mournful note, and the familiar warmth now felt oppressive, suffocating. Mr. Blank. Harrison was still standing by the door, his arms crossed, his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. The few customers who had witnessed the scene had returned to their coffees and conversations, leaving Ethan isolated in the immediate aftermath of his act of compassion. Sarah, the barista, offered him a sympathetic glance, a silent message of commiseration, but she quickly averted her eyes, knowing the manager's wrath was best avoided. "My office, Ethan, now." Harrison's voice was a low growl, devoid of any warmth, any trace of human understanding. It was the voice of a man whose carefully constructed order had been disturbed, whose rules had been brazenly broken. Ethan followed, his shoulders slumped, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on him. The small, cramped office, usually a rarely visited space for him, now felt like a tribunal, a cold, sterile chamber of judgment. The fluorescent lights hummed with an almost malicious intensity, casting harsh shadows that seemed to distort reality. Harrison closed the door, the soft click echoing like a gavel striking. The manager didn't mince words. "You abandoned your post, Ethan, in the middle of the morning rush. For what? Some woman who couldn't keep her balance? This isn't a hospital. This isn't your concern." His voice, though low, carried an icy sting. "We have procedures for this. You call 911. You don't just run out there like a damn Samaritan. You're a waiter. Your job is to serve our customers inside these walls, not play hero out on the street." Ethan stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back, a futile attempt to project composure. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain the undeniable pull of human decency that had compelled him to act. He wanted to scream that some things were more important than profit margins and rigid protocols. But the words caught in his throat, choked by the sheer, overwhelming injustice of it all. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that Harrison wouldn't understand, couldn't understand. The manager operated on a different moral compass, one calibrated solely by the cold, hard metrics of business. I thought she needed help, Mr. Harrison," Ethan finally managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper, betraying the turmoil raging within him. "She fainted. She could have been seriously hurt." Harrison scoffed, a dismissive sound that cut deeper than any insult. "And that's our problem? We're a cafe, Ethan, not an emergency room. You think I can afford to have my staff running around playing Florence Nightingale every time someone gets a bit woozy? Do you have any idea how much this costs me? The lost revenue from your section? The disruption? The message it sends? His eyes narrowed, gleaming with a cold, unforgiving light. You broke a fundamental rule. You put your personal sentimentality above your responsibilities here. And that, Ethan, is unacceptable. The manager's words were like hammer blows, each one chipping away at Ethan's already fragile sense of security. He felt a profound sense of injustice, a bitter taste rising in his mouth. He had acted from a place of genuine concern, a simple human impulse, and now he was being punished for it. The world, he realized, was not always fair. In fact, it was often brutally unfair, especially to those who dared to step outside the prescribed lines. The stakes, which had initially felt abstract, now solidified into a terrifying reality. He saw his tiny apartment, the meager contents, the precarious balance of his existence, all of it threatening to collapse. "So what does this mean, Mr. Harrison?" Ethan asked, the question heavy with dread, though he already knew the answer. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant, relentless hum of the city. Harrison leaned back in his chair, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction in his eyes, as if he had just tidied up a particularly messy ledger entry. "It means, Ethan, that your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. Consider this your final shift." He punctuated the sentence with a sharp, decisive nod, as if closing a book with a resounding thud. "You can collect your final pay and any personal belongings from your locker. I'll have someone escort you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Finished. Done. Out. The stark finality of it hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. His breath hitched, a gasp escaping his lips. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, chilling him to the core. Unemployment. In New York. The word echoed in his mind, each syllable a harbinger of disaster. How would he pay rent? His student loans? The small, carefully constructed life he had painstakingly built, brick by painful brick, was crumbling before his eyes. All because he had offered a bottle of water and a steadying hand to a stranger. The irony was a bitter pill. He wanted to plead, to beg, to explain that he had nowhere else to go, that this job was his lifeline. But pride, a stubborn, wounded thing, kept the words locked behind his teeth. He simply stared at Harrison, his eyes reflecting a mixture of shock, betrayal, and a deep, profound sadness. The manager, however, remained impassive, his expression as unyielding as granite. There was no room for negotiation, no space for empathy. It was a cold, hard business decision, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. As he walked out of the office, the cafe suddenly seemed alien, hostile. The familiar sounds now grated on his ears, the cheerful chatter of customers, a cruel counterpoint to the silent scream of his own despair. He saw Sarah at the espresso machine, her head down, avoiding his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of his fate. He walked to his locker, his movements stiff, mechanical. He retrieved his worn backpack, the few personal items that marked his presence here, and the small framed photo of his late grandmother, her gentle smile, a stark contrast to the harsh reality of his present. He looked at her picture, her eyes full of wisdom and kindness, and felt a fresh wave of grief wash over him, mingling with the sting of his present loss. He imagined her words of comfort, her quiet encouragement, and the ache in his chest intensified. The walk out of the cafe, past the very spot where he had helped Grace, felt like a public execution. He felt the phantom stares, the silent judgments, even though he knew most people were oblivious to his private tragedy. The bell above the door chimed one last time as he exited, a final, mocking farewell. The city outside, usually a source of chaotic energy, now felt overwhelmingly indifferent, its relentless pulse continuing unabated, uncaring of the small, broken man it had just cast aside. He stood on the sidewalk, the same sidewalk where he had performed his act of kindness, and felt utterly, profoundly lost. The crisp morning air, which had felt invigorating just minutes ago, now seemed to bite with a cruel chill, mirroring the cold emptiness that had settled in his heart. His first few days of unemployment were a blur of restless nights and anxious days. The small apartment, once a haven, now felt like a cage. The silence, usually a welcome respite from the city's roar, became oppressive, amplifying the frantic echo of his own thoughts. He would pace the worn carpet, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet, his mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. Each creak, each distant siren, each muffled conversation from the neighbors seemed to mock his sudden stillness, his forced idleness. He spent hours staring out the window, watching the lives of others unfold below. Children laughing in the park, delivery trucks rumbling past, couples walking hand in hand. Their lives, so full of purpose and direction, seemed to mock his own burgeoning aimlessness. He felt like a ghost, an invisible presence adrift in a sea of vibrant life. The city, usually a source of endless fascination, now felt like a relentless, indifferent monster, its towering skyscrapers casting long, cold shadows over his despair. The job hunt began immediately, a desperate, frantic scramble. He scoured online job boards, visited every cafe, every restaurant, every storefront that displayed a help wanted sign. Each application, each polite inquiry, felt like a small act of faith, a desperate plea to the universe. But the rejections piled up. Impersonal emails or polite, strained smiles from managers who saw only a gap in his resume, a face etched with anxiety, another desperate soul in a city overflowing with them. He was overqualified for some, underqualified for others, and for most, simply another anonymous face in a long line of applicants. The constant no chipped away at his resilience, leaving him feeling increasingly hollowed out, increasingly invisible. The weight of his financial situation pressed down on him, a physical ache in his chest. He meticulously calculated his remaining savings, watching with a growing horror as the numbers dwindled. Rent was due in 2 weeks. His student loan payment loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. The once distant threat of homelessness now felt like a tangible, immediate danger. He started cutting corners, skipping meals, walking instead of taking the subway, rationing every dollar with a grim determination. The simple act of buying groceries became an agonizing exercise in cost-benefit analysis. He felt the insidious shame of poverty begin to creep into his thoughts, a silent, corrosive force. His internal monologues became a continuous, looping torrent of self-recrimination and despair. Was it worth it? Was helping that woman worth losing everything? Was I foolish? Naive? He replayed the scene outside the cafe 1,000 times, dissecting every glance, every word, every gesture. He saw Harrison's enraged face, heard his scathing words, and a bitter resentment began to fester within him. He had acted on instinct, on a deeply ingrained moral code, and for that he had been cast out. The world, it seemed, had no place for simple kindness, for selfless acts. It was a harsh, unforgiving lesson. He thought of his grandmother, her hands gnarled with age, her eyes twinkling with a quiet wisdom. She had always taught him the importance of compassion, of looking out for others, of doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. "A good heart, Ethan," she would say, her voice soft and knowing, "is worth more than all the gold in the world." He clung to her words like a drowning man clings to a piece of driftwood. But even her comforting voice struggled to pierce the thick fog of his despair. He wondered if she would still say the same, knowing the price he had paid for his good heart. The days bled into weeks. The initial shock slowly gave way to a dull, persistent ache, a pervasive sense of hopelessness. He felt a profound sense of isolation, even in a city of millions. His few friends, busy with their own lives, offered words of sympathy, but their lives, so full of forward momentum, felt a million miles away from his stagnant existence. He found himself withdrawing, answering fewer calls, making excuses to avoid social gatherings. The shame of his unemployment, the fear of revealing his precarious situation, became a heavy shroud he wore everywhere. He felt like a failure, a burden, a discarded piece of machinery in the relentless grind of urban life. One particularly bleak afternoon, as a cold, insistent rain lashed against his window, blurring the already indistinct world outside, Ethan sat on his worn couch, an old, dog-eared novel open on his lap, unread. The heating in his apartment building was notoriously unreliable, and a chill seeped into the very marrow of his bones. He shivered, but it wasn't just from the cold. It was a tremor of existential dread. He had just received another automated rejection email, its curt, impersonal language slicing through his dwindling hope. He felt the familiar knot of despair tightening in his chest, making it difficult to breathe. The walls of his small apartment seemed to press in on him, suffocating him. He closed his eyes, wishing he could simply disappear, wishing he could rewind time, go back to that fateful morning, and perhaps, just perhaps, make a different choice. But even as the thought formed, a flicker of defiance ignited within him. No, he wouldn't change it. He couldn't. The act of helping had been an intrinsic part of who he was, a fundamental aspect of his being. To deny it would be to deny himself. But the conviction, however strong, did little to alleviate the gnawing fear in his gut. He remembered the woman's face, her emerald eyes, the quiet gratitude in her voice. Grace. He didn't even know her last name. She was a fleeting presence, a catalyst in his downfall, and yet he harbored no resentment towards her. How could he? She was a victim of circumstance, just as he was, albeit a victim with a much more expensive suit. He wondered where she was now, if she had fully recovered, if she ever thought of the waiter who had risked his livelihood for a moment of human connection. He doubted it. She was probably back to her bustling life, her momentary weakness a distant memory. He was just a footnote in her day, while she had become the central tragic figure in his. The sheer loneliness of his situation began to weigh heavily. He missed the camaraderie of the cafe, the easy banter with Sarah, the familiar faces of the regulars. He missed the sense of purpose, the simple satisfaction of a job well done. Now, each day stretched out before him, an empty canvas waiting to be filled. But he had lost his brush, his colors, his inspiration. The city outside, once a vibrant tapestry, now seemed a monochrome blur, its endless possibilities mocking his own sudden lack of them. He felt himself shrinking, fading, becoming a smaller, less significant version of the man he once was. The confidence that had quietly sustained him, the belief in his own capability, was slowly eroding, replaced by self-doubt and a paralyzing sense of inadequacy. He was adrift, unmoored, a ship without a compass in a vast, unforgiving ocean. The future, once a nebulous but generally hopeful concept, now seemed a terrifying, impenetrable fog. Tell me in the comments which city you are listening to this story from. Like and share with someone who loves emotional stories. The weeks stretched into a desolate month, then another. Ethan's life had settled into a grim routine of job applications, frugal meals, and the gnawing anxiety of dwindling savings. He felt the edges of his optimism fraying, worn thin by constant rejection and the relentless pressure of bills. The city, once a vibrant backdrop to his life, now felt like a relentless, indifferent machine, grinding him down into anonymity. He had started taking on odd jobs, dog walking, freelance deliveries, anything to bring in a few dollars, however meager. Each job was a fresh wound to his pride, a reminder of how far he had fallen from the structured predictability of his cafe work. He was a ghost, haunting his own life, a shadow moving through the bustling streets. Unseen and unheard. One particularly dreary Tuesday, the kind of New York day where the sky hung low and heavy, promising an inevitable downpour. Ethan was trudging through the financial district, delivering a small package for a meager $10. He was acutely aware of the crisp suits and purposeful strides of the people around him, a stark contrast to his own worn clothes and weary gait. He felt a profound sense of disconnection, an alien in his own city. The towering glass building seemed to mock his struggles, reflecting a world of success and power that felt utterly unattainable. His phone, which he kept charged despite the cost, was silent, a constant reminder of the lack of opportunities, the absence of hope. He was about to turn onto a side street when a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb beside him, its tinted windows obscuring the interior. He barely registered it, accustomed to the city's ceaseless flow of luxury vehicles. But then, the back window glided down with a soft, almost imperceptible hum, and a familiar face emerged. It was Grace. Her emerald eyes, even from behind the subtle barrier of the window, held a spark of recognition. Her expression was unreadable, a careful blend of composure and something else, something softer, more hesitant. Ethan froze, a jolted surprise shooting through him. He hadn't seen her since that fateful morning outside the cafe, hadn't dared to imagine he ever would again. The memory of his dismissal, the manager's cruel words, rushed back with a vivid, painful clarity. He felt a blush creep up his neck, a mix of embarrassment and a strange, unexpected flicker of hope. "Ethan?" Her voice was softer than he remembered, yet still carried an undercurrent of quiet authority. She hadn't forgotten him. The realization sent a strange tremor through him. He nodded, a hesitant, almost imperceptible movement. "Ma'am," he managed, his voice a little rough from disuse. He felt a sudden intense self-consciousness about his appearance, his slightly frayed jacket, the scuffed sneakers, the tired lines etched around his eyes. He wished the ground would simply swallow him whole. "Please, call me Grace," she said, a small, polite smile touching her lips. "Do you have a moment? I'd like to talk to you." Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and held a depth that made him feel both seen and slightly unnerved. His mind raced. Talk to me? About what? Is she going to offer me a small thank you gift? A $20 bill for my trouble? A cynical voice, born of weeks of disappointment, whispered in his ear. But then he remembered her eyes, the genuine gratitude he had seen that morning. He pushed the cynicism away. "Yes, of course," he replied. A cautious optimism beginning to bloom in his chest, fragile as a spring flower. She gestured to the empty passenger seat. "Please, step in." He hesitated for a moment, an instinctual wariness rising within him. He was a waiter, now an unemployed one, and she was clearly a woman of significant means. Their worlds were so vastly different. But curiosity and a desperate need for any kind of connection won out. He opened the door and slid into the plush leather seat, the scent of expensive upholstery and subtle perfume filling his senses. The interior of the car was a cocoon of luxury, a stark contrast to the gritty urban landscape outside. The driver, a silent, impassive figure, remained focused on the road. "I apologize for the abruptness," Grace began, her voice calm and measured, as the car smoothly pulled away from the curb, blending into the flow of traffic. "I've been looking for you, Ethan." His heart lurched. "Looking for me? Why?" The question tumbled out before he could filter it. A faint smile touched her lips, a hint of warmth in her sophisticated demeanor. "I felt terrible about what happened at the cafe that morning. I saw your manager's face, and I overheard. Well, enough to know that your act of kindness had serious repercussions for you." Her eyes met his in the rearview mirror, a deep, empathetic gaze. "I made some inquiries. It wasn't difficult to find out you were let go." A wave of shame washed over him again, followed by a surge of something he hadn't felt in weeks. Validation. Someone had seen. Someone understood. The injustice of it all, which had felt like a solitary burden, was now shared, acknowledged. It was just a misunderstanding," he mumbled, trying to downplay the humiliation, even though it still burned. "A misunderstanding?" Grace's voice held a note of gentle skepticism. "Or an act of profound human decency punished by corporate indifference?" She paused, letting her words hang in the air, a silent indictment of his former employer. "I believe it was the latter. And frankly, Ethan, it bothered me deeply. Your manager was entirely in the wrong." Her words were a balm to his wounded spirit, a much-needed affirmation. The bitterness he had harbored towards Harrison, the gnawing question of whether he had been foolish, began to recede, replaced by a surprising sense of relief. He hadn't been wrong. He hadn't been naive. He had simply been human. "I couldn't just let it go," Grace continued, her voice firm now, imbued with a quiet determination. "Your actions that morning spoke volumes about your character, your integrity, your compassion. These are qualities that are increasingly rare, Ethan, especially in a city like this. And they are qualities I value above almost anything else." He listened, bewildered, a cautious hope beginning to unfurl its delicate petals in his chest. What was she saying? What did she want? His mind, accustomed to disappointment, struggled to comprehend anything beyond a simple apology or a token gesture. "I'm a businesswoman, Ethan," Grace explained, her gaze still fixed on him in the mirror, her expression serious. "I run a venture capital firm. We invest in people, in ideas, in potential. And when I saw you that morning, when I realized the sacrifice you made, I saw immense potential." She paused, allowing her words to sink in, to resonate in the quiet luxury of the car. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did and what it says about you, and I've come to a conclusion." She then delivered the words that would shatter his world, utterly, irrevocably, and redefine the very trajectory of his life. "Ethan, I want to help you open your own restaurant." The air in the car seemed to solidify, thick and heavy. Ethan stared at her reflection, his mouth slightly agape, his mind struggling to process the enormity of her statement. His own restaurant? The words echoed in his head, surreal and impossible. It was a fantasy, a whispered dream he had barely dared to entertain in the darkest corners of his imagination. A fragile hope he had buried deep beneath layers of practical impossibility. His internal monologue, usually so verbose, was utterly silenced, stunned into submission by the sheer audacity of her offer. He felt a sudden surge of adrenaline, a dizzying mix of disbelief and a nascent, terrifying hope. "My own restaurant?" he finally stammered, the words barely audible, his voice laced with a raw, disbelieving awe. "But I'm just a waiter, an unemployed waiter." He shook his head, a bewildered smile playing on his lips, half wonder, half fear. "I don't have the money. I don't have the experience to run a business." Grace cut him off gently, her smile broadening, a genuine warmth radiating from her now. "You have something far more valuable than money or conventional experience, Ethan. You have passion. You have integrity. You have a vision, even if you haven't fully articulated it yet. And you have a profound understanding of hospitality, of what it means to truly care for people." I saw it that morning. That, to me, is the foundation of any successful venture, especially in the culinary world. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, more persuasive. "I've done my research, Ethan. I asked around. I spoke to some of the regulars at your old cafe. They spoke of your kindness, your attentiveness, the quiet care you brought to your work. And I also heard about your passion for cooking, your talent in the kitchen. It seems you have a secret life as an aspiring chef." Her eyes twinkled with a knowing amusement. "And I believe in backing talent, even if it's currently undiscovered." Ethan felt a blush spread across his face, not of shame this time, but of a profound, almost overwhelming embarrassment mixed with elation. His secret passion, his quiet joy in the kitchen, something he had kept hidden, deemed too frivolous, too impractical for his precarious life, had been noticed. It had been seen. It had been validated. The weight of weeks of despair, of self-doubt, began to lift, replaced by a lightness he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. "But why me?" he asked, still grappling with the sheer magnitude of her offer. "Why not someone with a proven track record? Why take such a risk?" Grace's expression softened, a flicker of something deeply human in her eyes. "Because, Ethan, I believe in paying it forward. Because I believe that true kindness should be rewarded, not punished. And because I have a very strong gut feeling about you. Sometimes the greatest risks yield the greatest rewards. And sometimes," she added, her voice imbued with a quiet conviction, "you just know when you found something special. You have a spark, Ethan. A genuine, unadulterated spark that deserves to be fanned into a flame." She reached into her elegant briefcase and pulled out a sleek, minimalist business card. "This is my contact information. Think about it. Really think about it. And when you're ready, call me. We'll discuss the details, the investment, the location, the business plan, everything." He took the card, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against hers. The card felt impossibly solid, a tangible piece of this surreal, miraculous encounter. It was a lifeline, a beacon in the suffocating darkness of his unemployment. He looked at the bold, elegant font of her name, Grace Beaumont, and the name of her firm, Ascension Capital. It felt fitting. I don't know what to say," Ethan stammered, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes welling up with unshed tears. The raw, unfiltered emotion was overwhelming. He hadn't realized how desperately he had needed this acknowledgement, this chance. "Don't say anything now," Grace replied, her smile gentle. "Just consider it, and know that I'm serious." "Ethan, this isn't a handout. This is an investment. In you, in your potential, and in the kind of world I want to see, where good deeds don't go unrewarded." She paused, her gaze holding his, a silent promise in her eyes. "I'll be in touch. Take care, Ethan." With a final, reassuring nod, she signaled the driver. The car came to a smooth stop. Ethan, still in a daze, opened the door and stepped out onto the familiar, yet now utterly transformed, street. The door closed silently behind him, and the black town car glided away, disappearing into the relentless current of city traffic. He stood there for a long moment, the elegant business card clutched in his hand. The rain now beginning to fall, a soft, cleansing shower. The city, which had felt so cold and indifferent just moments ago, now seemed to sparkle, each raindrop reflecting 1,000 possibilities. The towering buildings, once symbols of his oppression, now seemed to reach for the sky, emblems of ambition and aspiration. His internal monologue, which had been silenced by shock, now roared back to life. But this time, it was a symphony of hope, a crescendo of disbelief and exhilaration. His own restaurant. His own restaurant. The words repeated in his mind, each iteration more real, more tangible than the last. The impossible had just walked into his life, not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet, graceful act of reciprocity. The following weeks were a whirlwind, a blur of meetings, blueprints, and endless conversations with Grace. She was an astute businesswoman, sharp and decisive. But beneath the polished exterior, Ethan discovered a profound sense of humanity, a genuine belief in the power of connection and the importance of ethical conduct. She wasn't just investing in a business. She was investing in a vision, in a philosophy that resonated deeply with Ethan's own values. Their initial meetings were held in Grace's opulent office, high above the city, a stark contrast to the humble cafes Ethan was used to. The panoramic views of Manhattan spread out beneath them, a breathtaking vista of concrete and steel, each building a testament to human endeavor. Ethan, initially intimidated by the grandeur, found himself quickly put at ease by Grace's pragmatic yet encouraging approach. She listened intently as he tentatively shared his culinary dreams, his ideas for a menu that celebrated simple, wholesome ingredients with a touch of unexpected elegance. He spoke of creating a space that felt like a second home, a sanctuary where people could find comfort and connection, much like the quiet solace he had once found in his old cafe. Grace didn't just listen, she understood. She asked incisive questions, pushing him to articulate his vision with greater clarity, to consider the practicalities, the logistics, the inevitable challenges. She introduced him to a team of experts, a real estate agent who helped them scout locations, an architect who translated his ideas into tangible designs, a marketing consultant who helped him craft a brand identity. Ethan, initially overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the undertaking, found himself rising to the challenge. fueled by Grace's unwavering belief in him. They found the perfect location. A charming historic building in a vibrant, up-and-coming neighborhood, just a few blocks from his old cafe, but a world away in terms of potential. It had exposed brick, high ceilings, and large sun-drenched windows, a blank canvas awaiting his creative touch. Ethan spent hours poring over design plans, sketching out layouts for the kitchen, envisioning the flow of the dining room. He chose warm, earthy tones, natural wood, and soft lighting, aiming to create an atmosphere of inviting comfort and understated elegance. He wanted his restaurant to feel like a warm embrace, a place where every guest felt truly welcome, truly cared for. The name came to him one sleepless night, a quiet whisper in the darkness, the Gilded Spoon. It spoke of the everyday luxury of good food, of the simple pleasure of a well-crafted meal, and perhaps, subtly, of the golden opportunity that had been bestowed upon him. Grace loved it. The process of building the restaurant was arduous, filled with unexpected hurdles and moments of doubt. There were zoning permits to navigate, contractors to manage, and 1,000 small decisions to be made. Ethan found himself working longer hours than ever before, his hands stained with paint, his mind buzzing with ideas. He learned to negotiate, to delegate, to troubleshoot. He discovered a resilience he hadn't known he possessed, a deep well of determination that propelled him forward. Grace was a constant source of support and guidance, her calm demeanor a steady anchor in the swirling currents of construction and bureaucracy. She never micromanaged, but her presence was always felt, a quiet assurance that he was not alone. He hired a small, dedicated team, people who shared his passion for hospitality and his belief in the power of genuine connection. He interviewed each candidate personally, looking not just for skills, but for that intangible spark of kindness, that innate desire to serve and uplift. He remembered the feeling of being an invisible cog in a machine and vowed that his restaurant would be different. Every employee would be valued, every voice heard. As the grand opening approached, Ethan felt a dizzying mix of excitement and trepidation. The restaurant, once a dusty shell, had been transformed into a warm, inviting space, imbued with his spirit and his vision. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment. The dining room was set with elegant but unpretentious tableware, and the aroma of his test recipes wafted through the air, promising culinary delights. He had poured his heart and soul into every detail, every decision. The night before the opening, Ethan stood alone in the quiet, empty dining room, the soft glow of the pendant lights casting a warm halo around him. He ran a hand over the smooth, polished surface of a wooden table, a wave of profound gratitude washing over him. He thought of that fateful morning, of the woman who had fainted, of his manager's cruel dismissal, of the long, dark weeks of despair. He had lost everything, only to gain something infinitely more precious, something he had never dared to dream possible. He thought of Grace, her emerald eyes, her unwavering belief in him. She had seen beyond the uniform, beyond the job title, to the person beneath. She had not just given him a chance, she had given him a future, a purpose, a validation of his deepest values. He felt a lump form in his throat, a testament to the emotional journey he had undertaken. The journey had been long, arduous, and fraught with uncertainty. He had been dismissed, cast aside, left to drift in the unforgiving currents of a city that often seemed to reward cynicism over compassion. But in that moment of profound vulnerability, a miracle had unfolded. A quiet act of grace, that had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. He had learned that kindness, though sometimes punished, could also be the catalyst for extraordinary opportunities, a silent force that could open doors to the most impossible dreams. He had lost his job helping a stranger, unaware that the act would change his life forever. From a dismissed worker, he was now an independent and fulfilled owner. His character arc a testament to the transformative power of empathy and unexpected generosity. The cafe, his cafe, was no longer just a dream. It was a vibrant, living reality, a testament to resilience and a beacon of hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this emotionally explosive narrative left you breathless and forever transformed, like it now and share it immediately with someone who loves life-changing tales, before everyone misses this bombshell. Tell me in the comments which city you are listening to this story from.